Stress is sucking the life out of you, and you're only making it worse. Worrying is the intentional creation of problems through aligning with whatever makes you feel worry, and in return, life gives you just that. Now, everything that I'm going to say in this video is not meant to discourage, dissuade, dishearten, repress, or prevent you from continuing to indulge in, seek out, or pursue whatever is causing your stress. I do not intend to discourage you from fighting and leading the battles you choose. My only intention is to widen your perspective and to hopefully guide you to approach it and deal with it, whatever situation you're in a healthy manner, so that it does not come back around and bite you once you had moved on. But I also have to say it because neither do I think that the right approach to stress, fear, or anxiety is to just get off your ass, work your ass off, fight against yourself, fight against your feelings. Nor do I believe that that's a healthy approach to any such situation, because while it might provide you with momentary relief through that gained confidence, through going against yourself, through working your ass off through it, but unless you actually address the real reason to why you even felt such a way, or the root cause to why you had reacted in such a manner and chose to stay there for as long as you did, then it's going to come back around and bite you, whether it's after a month, a year, or even 10 years. Because such factors will always exist on your journey. There will always be a reason for you to be depressed, to stress, to fear, to worry. And I've been through it all, and I've seen it all. Over and over again, each time the trials get more and more intense. I've been at the bottom of that dark pit, at the middle of that endless dark tunnel. And I know exactly how it feels. How debilitating, how fearsome it could sometimes be. And so, when I used to wake up with a mountain sitting on my chest, heaving in fear and anxious first thing in the morning, and I would go online to find some random person or some influencer telling me to just get off my ass, to ignore how I feel, that it does not matter how I feel, all that matters is that I have responsibilities to work my ass through this feeling. Then I would quite frankly find it naive and ridiculous, at least in the manner they mean it in. Because no matter who says it, no matter how many times I hear it, or no matter how even I myself believed in it, sometimes it's just impossible to see the light at the end of that tunnel. How am I supposed to pick 10 other fights when I'm fighting one that is sucking the life out of me? Over and over again, I've been through it all. I've recreated such cycles, each time a different experience, a different trial, but ultimately with similar lessons. To let go, to trust, connect. Be present, hear your calling, know your truth, and when I eventually let go, when I let everything be, when I accept life exactly for what it is and how it is, then suddenly everything fades away. Suddenly everything just falls in place perfectly until I forget the lessons, until I let go of the lessons that initially helped me get over a situation, move on from a situation. Because that only means that I meant to recreate it by letting go of those lessons. Until I fall back to my old self, go back to my old habits, relapse to my ego of controlling, of fearing, of worrying, of despising. And then everything is recreated and I find myself going through the same lessons again. But how much longer do you want to live through such patterns? Because worrying is the intentional creation of problems. But remember, it does not matter how you first react, because that sometimes or that oftentimes just cannot be helped. What really matters is how long you choose to stay in that reaction, how much you let that reaction define you and be you. So was it all just my perspective? Was it all just in my head? Or does the way we think, feel, and perceive actually have a direct impact on our lives, actually have a direct impact on how the universe reacts to us? Moving on, first thing I would like to mention is that whenever you understand a situation you're going through, whenever you understand something in your life, it becomes less impactful in your life. It has less control over you. You know, just like if just by understanding something, you are halfway done, you're halfway through with actually dealing with it. Just like, you know, when you understand to heal, you need to understand your traumas, you need to know where they are stemming from, you need to understand their root causes and what actually, and once you are aware of that, now it's easier to deal with it. Now it's less fearsome, now it's less terrifying. Think about that math problem or science problem that terrified you at first because you did not understand its base concept. Not the problem, not specifically a specific problem, just the base concept in general, whether it's in math or in sciences, physics. And it terrified you. You did not see a way out. You did not see the light at the end of that tunnel. You could not just imagine that you would actually make it through. How am I going? You did not see a way to pass this course. But after a few days, once you understood the base concept, now it had less power over you. It became meaningless to you because now you understood it and you saw a way out, and you were certain that you could make it through this course with ease. And that's why the first thing I'd like to say is to define stress. Help you understand what you are actually dealing with, what stress, where is it coming from, and what's causing it, and what it even is. Because stress is essentially just our body's reaction to any threatening situation in our external environment. It's a state of mental distress or mental tension that's a reaction of our nervous system whenever we are faced by a threatening situation. So it's a nervous system reaction, and what happens is that there's that hormone that's responsible for stress, which is cortisol, and it's released in abundance depending on the intensity of the situation, and that causes this kind of feelings, that causes the worrying, the fear, the anxiety, which is the reaction to that threatening situation due to our cortisol being released more than it should be. Another thing that I want to mention is that it's very subjective, because what might stress you, what might worry you, what might cause you fear and make you feel threatened might not feel as anything, might not even, bother someone else in any way. And that's why it's highly subjective, and vice versa. Of course, what might bother someone else really to extremes might not feel like anything to you. And that's why you have to take any such experience with a grain of salt to begin with. Because is it really a fact, or is it just your perspective? Is it really that threatening? And if it is threatening, to what extent? Should I be reacting the way I am? Should I feel, is it really deserving? Is it worth that much reaction from my side? Or is it just that my body is reacting to a previous trauma and it's taking my past into consideration, and then factoring all of these things and feeling more extreme and more intense in an unnecessary situation? And once that's out of the way, what happens is, once you react in such a manner, once your body is triggered by a threatening situation, it pushes you into survival mode. That's the most primitive part to ourselves, the infamous fight, flight, freeze, or fawn reaction. It's our survival instinct kicking in. And those were important, those were meaningful at some point, and they are still meaningful when we need them. But we just conditioned our bodies to go into these states with anything, no matter how mild or extreme it is, because that's how we feel safe. To make sense out of anything, the ego just wants to feel safe, and it expects the worst, because whatever happens, if it's not the worst, if it's not the worst case scenario expected by your ego, then it won't be as bad. So it just prepares for the worst. So it just propels you towards that state even when it's not needed. And this survival mode, this fight, flight, or freeze or fawn experience, it's coming from the reptilian part of our brains. I think it's also called the temporal lobe, which also has the amygdala, which is the center of our fear. So it's all just a process, a reaction from our most primitive form of the brain, coming from our reptilian brain part. So, because back then our ancestors, since prehistoric times, they needed this reaction. They needed to be in that state because they went out for hunting. They were not living as comfortable as we are. They did not have a stable environment, a stable territory. So they stayed in that predator-prey environment, and they had to be in that survival. And that's why it's the first part of the brain that developed. But now, to what extent do we really need it? Because remember, whenever you are in survival, you're not anymore a creator. You cannot be creative when you are barely even surviving. And that's how you block yourself. That's how you block your manifestations. That's how you block your creative aspect. And that stops you. That causes procrastination. The freeze is actually the procrastination part. So the procrastination is also a reaction. We put that much value in procrastination being, as if we are faced by something threatening. And that's why we don't put the effort, we don't feel like, and we freeze. And so you have to balance it. You have to understand actually how far are you going to let it control you, because once you're in that survival, it's very hard to create anything. So you're just going to be existing, and that's what it means, being debilitated, living in fear and blocking off your creation. That's something I believe not many would like to experience if you're trying to achieve anything. So by stressing, by worrying, you're actually about something because you're not able to get yourself out of it, or you're not able to achieve it, or you're not able to create it, then you're actually reversing the situation by worrying and stressing about it, by first and foremost energetically, because you wouldn't be aligned with it. You have to feel anything before it comes into your life. The universe reacts to you and not the other way around. And so you would be blocking it even neurologically, because you cannot create anything, you cannot finish up anything, you cannot get yourself out of anything by just, a fight, by just barely surviving. You have to tap into that creative aspect, that creative center, the creation center within you, in order to see yourself as not controlled by this situation. And that's why it's very important that, that there's this code that tells you that the only difference or the only distance between you and wherever you want to be, between you and your dream life, is your mindset. That's how powerful it is. Even now it's not just words in air, it's not just, cliche, spiritual, ungrounded words. It has base in science now, because there is this part of epigenetics. But I'll keep that for a moment. Also, another thing that's worth mentioning is that life will always have such factors. There will always be something that agitates you or threatens you in some manner on your journey. That's what life is all about. There's only going forward in life. There's no going backwards. And in order for you to go forward, you need to learn things. Think about this for a moment here. It's a bit hard to deliver, to explain, articulated, but just think about it for a moment. Pause the video and think about it after I mention it if you wish to. There are lessons that you need to learn. So as you grow older, you become more mature. But how did you become mature? Because you learned lessons, you made some mistakes, and you went through some problems, which in turn taught you those lessons. So we're moving forward. As we grow up, we realize that we should become more responsible. We become more responsible, and with our responsibilities, we become better persons. We become more valuable. So it's As we learn something, it takes us forward. As we learn something, it takes us forward. But what happens if you do the same mistake? So think about this example. You're an employee and you did something wrong with, in your position, something that caused your employer to fire you from the company. But now you did something that's very hugely impactful in a negative way, that now you understand how you should deal with it. And then it affected you negatively, so when you think about it, you understand, oh, I should have done this, and what if I could have done it in that way, and now it would have been even much better than I would have if you had normally just done it. And so that gets you a position. Maybe you're interviewed and then you mention this idea, and there's this common mistake, for example, in the industry, and I thought about it and I realized that you could do this and it would be much better, and then you're hired at a better position perhaps. But if you forget the lesson you learned and you in your new company you do the same mistake, then again you're gonna go back to point zero. You're not gonna go back a little bit. You're gonna go back since before you learned that lesson, because the only reason you went to that position in life is because you learned a lesson that made you deserve to be there, that made you align, in other words, not deserve really, to be there. And that's why. And so there will always be such experiences in our life. We just need to understand that it's part of the process, the yin yang, that the non-duality, that everything exists simultaneously. The bad, the good, there's no really bad and good. It's all just being. It's the verb being. We are human beings, and that's part of our being. And once you're in that, you're really more connected to source than you ever would be. But that's for another video, or for another 10 videos actually. But and then you would be able to deal with whatever you're going through more efficiently. Some people, unfortunately, many people, maybe even most people, they live entire lifetimes recreating these cycles. So they don't, once they learn the lessons and they move on, they heal, they do not really heal. What they're doing is that they learn the lessons, they force the way through it, and they end up forgetting it because they are faced with an even bigger, more intense trial, which makes them just react the same way they did, make them just perceive it the same way they did, and ultimately they recreate the cycle. They go back to point zero. And that's why, and eventually they would pass it on to their children, and that is why there is the concept of ancestral trauma. And then what you have to do about it is to go into ancestral healing. There's this old chain that, because it imprints on who you are, it imprints on your genes, and it imprints on your DNA, and then that's what gets passed on once you give birth. And so think about, generational traumas in your family. Notice what generational patterns in your family exist. And that tells you what you need to really address is not what's going on into your life, the physical reaction by the universe, the external reaction by what we manifest into our reality. That's what the universe is actually reacting to, how we are on the inside. And that's how you are on the inside is what you actually need to address and heal. That's why I was mentioning epigenetics, because your thoughts, your feelings throughout your life, they imprint on your genes, on your DNA. And that is passed on to your children. And they keep recreating the cycles, and then their children would recreate the cycles. So, think about this for a moment. Every day we shed, or actually replace, 330 billion cells. So, and in total we have like 20 or 30, I think 20 trillion cells, and it would take in total about 80 to 90 to 100 days to completely replace each and every cell in your body. That's about, let's say, 3 months, and even 3 months. So if you manage to change your negative emotions and replace your negativity, replace those emotions of fear, stress, worrying, of sadness, of anger, of hatred, of despite, of envy, of jealousy, of competition, those survival, those emotions that are coming from the amygdala, which is part of your reptilian, part of your primitive brain. If you learn to replace those with more positive, with more highly vibrational, with more high frequency emotions like love, peace, joy, a will to live, a love for life, gratitude, being grateful for life as it is, exactly as it is, being blissful, regardless of how externally you are, what externally you are going through. If you do this for just 90 days, that's 3 months, then you completely change yourself down to your molecular structure, down to your cell composition, and that becomes your gene, and that becomes your DNA, and that it's all a chain. And then if you give birth, if you maintain that long enough, or as long as possible, or as till you give birth, then you had broken the generational cycle, you had broken a generational pattern of, if that's your generational trauma, if that's what you're been passed on in your family for generations, since prehistoric times, or since whoever knows when. Whether it's the excessive stress that's causing high blood pressure, high cholesterol, whether it's envy, whether it's lack, a feeling of lack that's causing that's blocking your abundance. If you just manage to align and feel that abundance for 30 days, I'm not telling you that that's how long it's going to take to manifest since you start feeling it. No, it's going to manifest once you feel it, once you become it, it will manifest very quickly. But I'm telling you, that's even after 3 months, it's going to become you down to every cell in your body. The history about the programming, the past programming of you having to react in this way, and then having your fearing of you going through a dysfunctional childhood and having a dysfunctional upbringing, which caused you to maybe to have a fear of failure, to stress over mild experiences, to procrastinate, which is also, it all stems back to something from your childhood most times. If you do this for 30 days, for 3 months, you would completely shift that. It would not be part, even has a memory in your part. It would still be in your subconscious if you let it be, if you do not even address it in the subconscious. I have a video about the subconscious, which you can learn more in details about how to deal with that part of yourself. And so that's how far it actually goes. That's how far it could actually affect you. And when you do not heal it, when you do not heal the reason behind it, the root cause to it, it only comes back. It only creates a cycle, because you will be faced with a similar situation. And if you only react and act and do and think and feel the same way you normally do, then it will just be a continuous pattern. It will just lead you to the same place. You will not break that cycle, and it's going to happen again. It will pass, not so quick and not in a very nice way, and it's going to be recreated. Or you can force your way through it, and then it will pass, and then when it happens again, you might be more resilient to it, but it's still, you are going to react according to your base programming. This even, I was reminded by something very interesting. It's a law in thermodynamics. It's very interesting, because I think earlier I just said the exact opposite of it, but so as if we are the only anomaly or the only exception to it. It's a law existing that functions on the entire universe, but there's a little twist in it, there's a little catch to it, if you will, that makes it a perfect analogy, and I couldn't let it just go, and it's entropy. The law of entropy, one of the laws of thermodynamics. It basically is the measure of energy contained within a system that's not really used up, like that's not really put for work, that's not put for practical work. The way I like to, the best definition I have for it, or I know what I like to look at it with, is that's the measure of disorder. So it's either defined as the measure of disorder or the measure of existing energy that's not being used up. And I like the other one better, the former definition, which is the measure of disorder or the measure of chaos, because I was saying that we just move forward and we only improve as we go forward. But according to the law of entropy, that energy get more and more useless as it moves forward. So are we the only anomaly? Are we the only exception to the law of entropy? And yes, and no. So think about that light bulb that starts gradually fading away with time. But an even more grandiose example, which is the best example that's being used when explaining the law of entropy, is the universe. You know, at first, and the law of entropy is measured from 0 to 1. I don't know if it goes past 1, but I know that it's never a negative, because in negative you'd have to go back in time, you'd have to have less or disorder, and by nature everything is more, energy is getting less and less with time, whether in any contained system. So as we grow up we become weaker, right? But we move forward in a sense. So which is it? We become weaker and we have less energy to actually invest, to consume, to consume things or to produce things. But we also improve and we become more mature, and everything is becoming more orderly in our heads rather than disorder. You know, there's another example, which is the glass. So as the glass is sitting on a table or on a desk, it's very close to a zero. Not a zero, but very close to a zero. So it's perfectly, the energy within that system is completely being used up. But as you get it closer and closer to the edge of the table, that zero starts getting to 1 quite fast. And when it's in the air, when you push it over the table and then it's in a free fall towards the ground, it gets very quickly to 1 and hits 1 when it hits the ground. That's a completely disorderly system. There's no more energy that's been contained even within that system, or that any energy of that system is not being used for anything. It was used to shape that glass. Now it's shattered in pieces, so that energy that was contained in that system is not used for anything. What I'm trying to say is, even in the universe, you know, there is, at the Big Bang, it was very close to zero, maybe even a zero before the Big Bang, regardless of whatever is before the Big Bang. And then when right after the Big Bang, even, I believe it went from zero to something, it shifted massively. Right, you know, just a few seconds after the Big Bang, the measure of entropy would have shifted massively in just few seconds. And now the universe continues to expand, so the energy becomes more and more less impactful. The energy that's actually being used up, it's becoming weaker and weaker, so the entropy keeps increasing. Except at a perfect zero, at an absolute zero, which is the 0 Kelvin degrees, which is negative 273 degrees Celsius. That's the temperature where entropy comes to a halt. And this reminds me of, you know, being one and going into Zen state of calming down your mind. So when we are at an absolute zero in our head, that's when we stop the moving towards disorder. That's when, with time, we actually improve rather than become worse, rather than we become more disorderly. If we just think about it here, if we're always just so heated up in our heads, and you're thinking about a million different things, and you're stressing about this, you're putting energy, your energy is very dispersed all the way, your attention is all over the place, and you're just messed up in your mind, you're messing up your mind, then it's going to take a toll on you once you grow up. It's going to burden you, and it's, you know, moving forward will only mean that you are becoming more and more disorderly. Your system is becoming more and more disorderly, in other words, because your spirit is infinite, the spirit is beyond everything. Your connection to source, your source energy is beyond all of this. I'm talking about you as a person, as a spiritual being, experiencing, manifesting, and in a 3D being to experience this life. But when you are calm, when you're constantly, you know, just whenever you're faced by something negative, whenever you're faced by stress, you're just calming down, you're just tapping into that divine energy within you, and you're just icing your brain down. You're not letting your brain play all over the place and mess you up, but you're just quieting it down. Then it's, as you grow up, you become more and more resilient until you have healed every part of yourself. You addressed everything, and now, no matter what happens externally, you're just, you know, very stable, very grounded, very connected and calm, collected and joyful, loving, peaceful, regardless of what's going on. And that means that you are becoming more orderly with time rather than more disorderly with time. And that's part of the beauty. I find this to be a perfect analogy. Another thing I'd like to mention before we move on is a study that was done by Dr. Joe Dispenza. And by the way, I love all the studies done by this man. It's just everything, all of his books, all of his studies, all of his lectures, they're all just magnificent. And he's giving science to spirituality, to manifestation. It's not anymore that, Hulu up, supernatural science fiction kind of thing. So that's like to the dubious among us, to the skeptics among us. That's even becoming more and more evident. That's why I love all of his studies. But one that has to do with stress and what effect it is that when you calm your mind does it have on you, what effect it is when you start perceiving things differently, what effect does it have on your stress just by perceiving things differently, just by feeling different towards a situation, how much it affects you in your entirety. And they gathered, it was a study done on approximately 120, it was, around 120 individuals, and they measured the levels of cortisol against the levels of the IgA, the immunoglobulin A, which is the primary form of defense against external infections, against disease, against viral infections and bacterial infections, so on. And the cortisol levels, which is responsible for stress, which is a reaction to stress by stress, and that whatever I said earlier. And they found is that when they got people and they trained them, those 120 individuals, and they trained them for several days to shift their emotions from survival emotions like fear and anxiety, stress, worrying and hatred, jealousy, competition, all of these feelings that are stemming from their survival aspect. They taught them how to shift them to like more high vibrational feelings, like feelings that are coming from your oneness, from your connection to source. And those are like love, joy, gratitude, bliss. They taught them to perceive whatever in their life differently, and so are able to awaken those positive feelings even if they were initially feeling negative. And they went through they did it through a meditative state. And that's how you actually deal with things. That's how you address your situation. And through the meditative state, when they shifted from the negative to the positive aspect, thoughts and perspective, they found that their immunoglobulin A increased by 50%. So now your body is more powerful than ever. It's more strong. It's more strengthful than ever, and it's willing to create. It has more energy than ever. When all of your energy was focused on surviving and in cortisol and stress, then your body was not focusing on anything else. It had all of its energy just facing the threat it's actually dealing with. But when you took the threat away, when you took the power away from that threat, it now had the power to actually focus on other things, give energy and attention to other things. And the cortisol levels decreased by 16 or 17%, which is great, and you improved your body's efficiency, you decreased your stress by that percentage. So that's to put you into perspective of what effect your perspective, your thoughts, your feelings have on you. And I think that's all for today. Oh my god, that's going to be a very long video. But if you like this video, if you learned something from it, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share with anyone you think might need to hear this message, might need to know about this. Thank you for tuning in.